Hey,
Hey, hey.
here we are, all together. Ron and Dani.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
We're calling
Welcome,
it the
everybody.
Transcontinental. Welcome. Good evening to you from Newark, New Jersey, overlooking the west side of Manhattan, and from Utah.
Salt Lake City. Yeah. We're just relaxing and watching the sunset over the mountains and enjoying the very long summer days.
Now that's not what I see behind you.
No, this is green screen. It came highly recommended. Everybody said, "Oh, Dani, you need to change it up. You need to have some fun in the background." So we decided to do some green screen, like Joe Biden.
No, nothing wrong with green screen. But what's your green screen depicting?
That's Salt Lake City. So this is Salt Lake City at night. There's the Capitol and
yeah, that's what I thought, because I did visit Salt Lake City one time in order to be sold NetDocs.
Nice.
And I went. I got a free what do they call it? When you go on a junket, a free junket.
Ah.
And I never would have had the opportunity to do this, but this evening I did, and it was very special. Really, what a nice place. And I saw an old friend of mine from Twitter. When I say an old friend, I've been on Twitter for a long time. So I know there are people who've been with me since forever.
I'm impressed you survived the purge, because I was never on Twitter. I joined Twitter during my campaign. And so I had Twitter for like a year in 2022, and then I dropped it. And that's when Elon Musk had acquired it. So I decided, I'll just set up, YouTube. I'll kind of use it once in a while. Twitter's become by far my favorite social networking platform. So
someone said to me years ago, he said to me, Ron, you're going to do really well on Twitter. This platform was made for you. And not yet. I mean, I've been shadow banned, and I'm still throttled, but I'm big enough, and I post enough, and damn it, people like me.
Well, you're a very likable guy. So likable, in fact, that JD Vance followed you per your request. I am so jealous.
That was, right. I mean, it was really just on a whim. I took that piece from our little screen test that we did last weekend, and which we ended up using for our preview. And I said, actually, and I actually moved it to further up in the clip to sort of get the gag out of the way. And I really didn't think, I mean, obviously, I don't know. I'd love to know how that happened. Like, you always wonder, how much does the person use the account himself, and how, I mean, my understanding is usually with these people is that they're comms people, really have management of the account, but they do also, and they can pop in any time. And you can always tell what like when Trump would tweet something as opposed to when someone else,
his intern, his unpaid intern who's in the basement of the White House. Yeah.
So, Dani, one of the things that happened when I was preparing our trailer was that I came to more of an understanding of your political adventure. How you ran for I mean, you had mentioned it to me before, but how you ran for district attorney in your county of is it Salt Lake County?
Salt Lake County. Yep, 3 million people.
And they described you as a recent law school graduate.
Yes, they did.
And isn't it true that you were a recent law school graduate.
It's
I mean, compared to
partially
me,
true.
almost everyone's a recent law school graduate. But how long had you been out when you ran?
Well, let's see. 2019 is when I had sat for the bar and passed. So 3 years.
2019.
3 years. But Ron,
Whatever it is.
Ron, what does that say about our DA? That I felt confident in my ability to perform better than my opponent, who has ample experience as an attorney.
I mean, after all, being what did you maintain was your qualification for doing that? I mean, what had you been doing until then, from law school until the political run there?
Yeah. So prior to law school, I had worked both at the governor's office with their general counsel. I had also worked with the State Department. During law school, I worked for Raytheon as their first ever summer clerk. And I had moved into that because I wanted to do more transactional work. I never wanted to go into litigation. And then prior to that, this is a great segue into discussing JD Vance, because prior to that, I had taken the GED to graduate high school. And the reason for that was that my family moved every 6 months growing up. I had an extremely bipolar father who made enough money.
Extremely bipolar? Is that really
Extremely bipolar. That's how I describe
Can you
him.
be just a little bipolar? Is that one of the options? I didn't realize.
Yeah, so it is very much actually on a spectrum. So they're severe bipolar, but he was if you pull out the DSM-5 and read off what a typical bipolar was back in the 90s when he was diagnosed, it would read identically to my father. Like you could just slap a picture of him on there. And so he could only kind of carry a job for about 6 months, and he would take on projects that would only last that long. He's sort of a general engineer, but he never went to school for it. He was taught by his father, and then he picked it up, and he's really great at math. He's a genius. I mean, the guy's brilliant. So we moved, though, every 6 months following him in his career. Now, my mom, she was in a plane crash, burned from head to toe in third-degree burns, had a life after death experience, saved a family from a burning home, went and wrote a book about it called The Burning Within. And so at the same time that my father was moving us around and we were having some, typical issues that you experience in that sort of lifestyle, right? So domestic violence, constant threats of being homeless, constant, self-deletion attempts. Sorry, I have to use that language, but we're on YouTube and the censors are always watching. So I grew up sort of in and out of this world of wealth, but hidden crime and living kind of two lives where I was lying to teachers, I was lying to the people around me, and school was the only place I felt safe and where I had some level of consistency, which was weird because I was always the new weird kid, and that was always a struggle, but I felt like I could just run away and hide and read, right? And I got to see the world in a very unique setting. And so when my parents, though, finally divorced, we ended up homeless. My dad took off with everything. And so I was homeless at 13, and we had tried going to homeless shelters, which is really a death sentence. If you're not in that lifestyle, it's very hard. You can become victimized very, very quickly. And I saw everyone else getting all these government resources and handouts and benefits and food stamps and all these different programs that just seemed always a little bit beyond our reach, because when you move and you're homeless, you don't have an address to put down on applications. You don't have a cell phone for people to contact you at. You don't have a landline. You have bad credit. You're not going to be able to, get a place to rent. So my mom used my name, obviously, on all of our rental leases and everything else, which kind of messed with my credit later in life and my younger brothers, bank accounts, you name it. And then I had to, like I said, I started working and I started singing in Branson, and I was able to transition from working, a part-time job, because in the state of Missouri, I think it was 15 years old, you can start working, but it's strictly limited. Whereas if you go into entertainment, you can make a lot more money and you can work 24/7. You can work as much as your heart desires. And so I went in and I started singing.
Basically,
and doing openings.
the Branson provision.
Yeah, the Branson, but it's the entertainment law provision, right? So you can make children into working slaves so long as, you follow the basic rules. So I went and I did that. And then my mom got an offer to work down in Florida. When we moved to Florida, we ended up homeless again. And then we got a place because I dropped out of school again. So I was kind of just in and out of school, public school and private school through BYU. They had an independent study. And eventually I gave up because no one was accepting my credits. Yeah.
So you're maintaining at this point still, your family, a connection to LDS.
Yes, because the morals and the basic rules, the idea of having covenants with God, the idea that there was a God, the idea that there was something greater out there than me, and someone I could pray to, someone I could have faith in, something that I could hope in, was pivotal to who I am and to how I was raised. This idea, this concept of right and wrong, seeing the pitfalls of those around me, especially in my own family, whether it be drug addiction, whether it be, frankly, untreated mental health concerns, right? Whether it be whatever it was, irresponsible spending. I'd never wanted that for my kids. And I never wanted that to be a part of my life as I grew up. And I had faith that if I worked hard and I was smart, that God would help me and that he would allow me to become the person I am. So because of that background, I can't count the numbers of times that our neighbors, I had to pull out of DV situations, and call the police and fight with prosecutors and because in the state of Missouri, by the way, so my parents did try and reconcile, but in the state of Missouri, when there's a DV case, they arrest both parties. Regardless of who swung or whatever happened, they arrest both parties. And so there were a lot of times where I would have to negotiate with the prosecutor and the judge to get my parents out of jail because I didn't want to end up in the foster care system because I had friends in the foster care system.
So you had gotten to know about the grittier side of the world of law enforcement and criminal prosecution.
Right. And from a very young age, my perception of police was not great, right? The saying that I always had for cops was they were always there when you didn't need them and they were never there when you did. And and so my whole life I had this very negative perspective of the world, of law enforcement, of the legal system, because to a very great extent it failed. But when I grew up, I realized it wasn't the legal system failing my family. It was societal systems and societal failures that could have helped my family a lot that were not there. And the law is not well equipped to step in for where families fail.
No, it's not. I'm just surprised to hear someone describe so dispassionately your having been so disappointed by a parent and yet not blame. Oh no, but you stuck with your church affiliation.
Yeah.
A lot of people coming out of that situation would blame, the LDS is this highly structured hierarchical society.
Yeah.
So how could it be that your dad was able to, I mean, look, he was mentally ill,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem, you nonetheless look back on that experience of growing up in that environment as strongly positive. And then you go to your interactions with the legal system, which, as you observe, is absolutely not equipped to deal with this kind of harsh human reality. And yet there's so little else that, like, they're the emergency room for every kind of problem.
Yep.
And yet you end up becoming involved in that system, yes, you want to reform it, but like the narrative that you've given me so far, it sounds like something that would end up being an explanation for why you became a mad bomber or a drug addict.
Yeah.
So, but then again, you said that you really feel that the moral and religious grounding that you had prevented that.
1,000%. I just watched Hillbilly Elegy, and there's a scene where JD Vance goes to put his mother in rehab, and he's going through law school interviews, right? He's trying to get a clerkship. He's trying to get any opportunity he can, and he's in Yale, which is a huge accomplishment, right? A tremendous accomplishment. It's incredible how smart this man had to have been to get to where he's at. So but anyway, he's trying to check his mom into rehab, and she's like, F this, I'm out of here. F you, I'm not doing this. And she storms off, and he's using his last time to try and help his mom. And his sister stops him and she says, JD, you don't know everything. Okay. And I can't advocate for mom right now. I have to go, but try forgiveness. And he takes a moment, he goes and he sits in the car with his mom, and she's upset. And, it's a very hard thing to do, to admit that you have an addiction, to admit that you're weak, to admit that your children are your adult. That's hard. And so I really feel for the mom in that scenario. I feel much more for JD Vance because I've been in that situation. I've been in his seat so many times. But there's a moment where he turns to her and he says, this is my girlfriend, let's talk about it later. And then there's this connection between them, and she starts to open up. And one thing that JD Vance talks about in his speeches at rallies and in person is something that I experienced. And that is that whenever things get really, really hard, there's always good people who are role models. There's always good people who will save you. There's always something good in this world. And one of those good things is you. And choosing forgiveness, choosing self-reliance, choosing responsibility that should have never been placed on anyone's shoulders is part of what makes us love this country so much. Is because in this country alone can people like JD Vance and myself become the people we are today. Only in this country.
Is that really true?
Absolutely. I went back to South Korea this last spring, and they went from nothing in the 1980s to becoming one of the world's, highest grossing GDPs. They're incredible, right? But if you're poor in Korea, you're stuck. You're basically poor. If you are rich in Korea, you are basically rich. Now, America is slowly closing in. It's slowly establishing these very strict ceilings. And you see that in Hillbilly Elegy. And I experienced it, in my own life, where simple things like figuring out which fork is the salad fork, right? There's certain lifestyles that you have to adjust to when you're climbing the ladder. But America allows for that opportunity in ways that no other country can. And I can say that definitively.
That is amazing to me because, I've never lived anywhere else. As a student, I studied in Israel. I was with Americans. It was a completely un-Israeli experience. I always hear people say only in America. And I do think people often say it to an extent that is perhaps unrealistic, but it must be that because of even though, as you point out, we are in the process of the social stratification that did not exist in America the way it did in the old country anyway, is beginning to sort of stiffen because of the destruction of the middle class and the capture by elites of so much of the shared culture.
Yep.
And we could talk about that. We got plenty of
And
time.
the economy, it's complete control over the economy. And these structures that are created when the government picks winners and losers make it impossible for people like me and JD Vance to succeed. Things like racial discrimination in hiring and in allowing people into Ivy League schools is a huge deterrent for people like JD Vance and myself to even try. Um, Especially, we definitely in this culture now have much less honest appreciation for hard work and for making it on your own. It seems to be if you know the right people, things are a lot easier, impossibly easier for you. But that even then, we're still so open in terms of you can genuinely overcome so much hardship in this country with a little bit of hard work and
I
some
mean, the
streets.
only thing really I think is almost impossible to overcome is the YouTube algorithm.
That's absolutely true.
But besides that, I mean, and I know that you have some of your friends have come over to join us here in this new endeavor, and guys, the plan, you have to be old enough, okay? The plan here is for us to alternate our bi-monthly stream until, of course, everyone just demands that we do more and more of it, and just we're gagging on revenue. But until that happens, next time it's going to be on Dani's house. Okay, this time it's here at my house, because everybody has to subscribe. Okay, and we're gonna leverage each other's massive, approximately 12,000 subscriber base to take over the whole world. But the Dani people don't hardly know me. I'm the child of an immigrant. My mother came from Cuba in 1956, right? Her parents left Poland.
Oh.
They're Jewish, Ashkenazic Jews from Poland, left Poland in 1935 because life had become extremely difficult for Polish Jews well before World War II began. The Polish government was rather, they were basically trying to, part of their policy was to try to out-Nazi the Nazis in some respects. I mean, we're not talking about mass extermination, but there was a lot of, it was very rigidly anti-Semitic. Look, why wouldn't, if you could get out of Eastern Europe in the 1930s, why wouldn't you? But they couldn't get to the United States. They were able to get to Cuba. They lived in Cuba for about 20 years. Then they came to this country. My mother met my father, who was the son of a single mother. His father had not been around. And my father was such a great father, and he never had a father. And his mother died when he was 9. And he was raised by his grandmother, who had come here from Czechoslovakia in 1898. And I ended up going to Princeton and law school at Northwestern, and becoming a very famous social media figure.
Oh, please. Very, very famous attorney. When I saw you on Eric Hunley's channel, I was like, what? The Ron Coleman is here? What?
I don't really quite understand how someone would have heard of the Ron Coleman, but I don't want to talk about that. What I do want to talk about now, because it's something that in my narrative just reminded me of something I'd wanted to ask you, which is, you're talking about the amazing opportunities that America still provides, and yes, so much structurally is being destroyed, and that's why we're fighting. That's why we're fighting.
Yeah.
But given the uphill battle, people like you and JD Vance, we're going to say people like you and JD Vance, with the understanding that you're not holding yourself out as the same as JD Vance. He's
No.
you might not, excuse me, folks, that was a piece of popcorn. You might not be nominated for the vice presidency for a couple of years. But there's also obviously some kind of built-in on switch that makes you choose. And maybe in your case, it was Latter-day Saints. And maybe in my case, it was that mythical Jewish achievement ethic. Or maybe it's just entirely genetic and personality. I don't know.
Nope. It's the American dream. It's the American dream. It's this belief, Ron, that you and I share, that our parents shared, which is regardless of where you're from, you can make it. Regardless of where you're from, the only one you have to rely on, the only one you have to blame at the end of the day is you. And that ability to take self-accountability, that's where I agree with you. I don't know if it's genetic or if it can be taught. I'm not entirely sure. What separates me from the 99% of people in my situation that don't step forward, that don't achieve.
Right. So, but that's the point, right? I mean, obviously, JD and even DA are exceptions to the rule. I mean, anybody given the hand that you were dealt would assume, one thing that's not going to happen to me is that I'm going to become a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's not going to happen to me is that I'm going to run for political office and even be noticed. Anyone can decide he's running for political office. I could announce right now that I'm a third-party candidate for governor of New Jersey. All right. Doesn't make it happen. You made it happen. And this story may not yet be finished.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not. But you asked what makes me qualified. I think that when you have that upbringing, when you have that experience, you see law and the structure of law from the bottom up rather from the top down. And that's one thing that my opponent missed entirely. So come 2020, he's super anti-cop, super anti-policing at all. He's very discriminatory. The cases he takes on are extremely subjective. And I just see my city, my county. By the way, the only way that this happens is with some level of security and safety. Because if you are not safe, when you have your cell phone stolen from you and you're poor, that's it. Your world's done. How are you going to get a call back for an interview? How are you going to get to work when someone wrecks your car?
Luxury beliefs. That's why that's a term that I had heard a while ago, and I was reminded of it in the last couple of days. I have been talking with Kyle Seraphin, and I had referred to the same phenomenon as the curse of abundance. This idea that you just, we're going to enact all these social programs, or we're going to run the Secret Service in super socially progressive ways because we can take for granted that our movies will be hits. We can take for granted that the president won't be shot because it's all gravy. It's all guaranteed. It's all going to work out fine. So let's just share the cream. And there's a world of people who are growing up in the, who don't, like you said, people like your adversary and the guy who won the election. He's not going to go to sleep at night worrying about his safety.
No.
But he's sure going to feel, but he will sleep well, knowing how virtuous he is. Yes. That he has saved how many number of people from having to have any sort of accountability for their conduct.
Which is insane because what it does, and I've said this a million times, when you are picking and choosing winners and losers based on, race, upbringing, etc., anything other than merit, right? When you're doing that, what you're doing is you are saying some victims are inherently more valuable than others, especially as a prosecutor. If you are choosing to decline over 200 different felony cases that involve repeat violent offenders, who've been given multiple plea deals, multiple chances, and your excuse is, well, there's not enough room at the jail. You need to find a new profession. When you decline those cases over and over and over, and the best thing you can do, the best thing you can say to those city prosecutors and to the victim is, well, it doesn't serve the best interest of justice. That's a problem. And Sim Gill has been doing this repeatedly. I mean, that was just in 1 month, 2 months. Think about, and these are things that I talked about during my campaign. This guy's been in office for 12 years, and the damage he has done to Salt Lake County is irreparable. And the reason that I decided to run wasn't because, I had some notion of being DA and then moving on to bigger and greater things. Because to me, DA is not what I wanted. I did have political ambition, but not for DA. The reason I ran for DA is because I had had so many victims reach out to me privately after I had graduated law school and while I was in law school, who said, this is what happened to me and nobody cared. And all I want is justice. All I want is to walk out of my house and feel safe. I know that guy's out there and I can't leave my house. Can you please help me?
And that is something that class of people, the elites that run this country, cannot identify with.
Nope.
Or they choose not to identify with.
They choose not to, because in their perspective, well, you're in the situation you're in because you chose that, because they can't conceptualize this idea that things happen to people and the world is a really hard and scary place. And if you don't have a basic social structure, a basic support system around you, you fall real quick and you fall to the bottom. And, in some ways I don't hate that I was homeless. I don't hate that experience because it made me fearless. Once you've hit the bottom, you know what it's like. And then you go, okay, so I'm still alive. And that's what I always tell myself whenever I get nervous. I'm still alive.
It's funny because, I'm 61 years old now. And I realized, most men, I think if you're a normal man, you'd have to really be very effete not to have this in mind. But years ago, I read this and I realized it was true. When on some level, a man walks into a room and evaluates who he can take and who he has to worry about physically. Okay. And I'm a phenomenal intellectual powerhouse. That's what I'm about. Okay. But you're just checking out how do I, it's operating on a certain level. And I worked for a great lawyer named Dan Williams. I wonder if he's even with us anymore. And he went a little bit cuckoo, but I remember him telling me he'd gone to a Dartmouth game. He was a Dartmouth man, and someone was drunk, and Dan was so pissed off he was about to pop the guy, and he said, "Wait a minute, I'm a lawyer. I can't fight with that guy. I'll lose my license. I can't. We're not like regular people.
I wasn't made for jail."
No, forget about jail. Like, he could lose his ability to. This guy made a lot of money,
right?
So that story always stuck with me, and then I realized between that and scoping out the room, Ron at 61, you're whatever fighting days you may have ever had, which for me pretty much ended in intermediate, middle school, are behind you. You're not going to be. No one is looking to you to settle anything anymore. And what is it that you said that made me think of that? That you look at, so you get through your entire life. Like, I realize I went through childhood and youth and middle age without really ever being at physical risk. I had a really, with God's help, it should continue. But I made it already this far, and there was just the one time a cop in Rockland County pulled a gun on me and pointed at my head.
That's great.
But nothing happened.
Thank God.
Anyway, so I've lived a charmed life, and I'm not from an elite background. it's just clean living, And it's actually kind of interesting because I'm comfortable. My office is here in Newark. My mother thinks that if she knew that I were in Newark at 9:30 at night, like people have these ideas of what it's like to be in the city and the danger. And I never would think of Salt Lake County. Salt Lake are there any parts of Salt Lake City itself that are dangerous?
All of it. All of it. I'll tell you, Ron, we are now in the top 100 most dangerous cities in America. Whereas we weren't before. We've seen a 47% increase in violent crimes. We've seen, I think it was a 200 or 300% increase in car theft and break-ins. We're basically at the top nationwide in terms of car break-ins. So, that San Francisco snow, have you heard that term? That's definitely come here to Salt Lake. We now have Salt Lake snow, and it's taken on a whole nother meaning.
Actually, I haven't heard that term.
Oh, so San Francisco snow refers to after your windows get shattered, and it sparkles on the ground and it looks like snow. That's San Francisco snow. So, I mean, so I saw everything that was happening here. I went through law school. I went through my undergrad, and at the time they were doing this whole intersectionality, gender theory, critical theory bullshit. And one of the things that forgive my language, one of the things though that they brought up a lot was privilege. And I remember taking a privilege test in constitutional law. I stood up and walked out, and my constitutional law professor got really upset with that. And I went down to the dean and I said, I'm not paying tuition to take a privilege test. I said, this country is not designed to make all people equal. It's designed to give everyone an equal shot. Where in the Constitution does it say that I have the right to demand from anyone any sort of bill payment, a credit card, hair, you name it, okay? Where does it say in the Constitution that I have the right to anyone else's labor, time, energy, you name it? I deserve nothing but what I make for myself. And I refuse to buy into this.
So I guess this goes back to your being fearless, because most people, I mean, I always had a big mouth. So yeah, I had my own way of getting kind of in trouble, but I did have the confidence that comes with being the firstborn and having parents who really loved me and having been successful in school all my life. But you had none of the things. In fact, you definitely had a stronger religious connection than I did at that point in my life. Yet you had the courage in law. In other words, you've transformed yourself. You're in law school. You've transformed yourself from a homeless girl whose father is what we would have called a lunatic, and who has blown the coop. Your mother is going through all kinds of who knows whatever, when, wherever. You're in law school now. You have transcended all these problems. One might very well think that you're going to say, listen, I'm here. I better play it safe. I better not risk getting thrown out. If this is the test, then I'm going to have to take that test. It's not. This is not my system. I should be happy just to be here. And yet that wasn't your attitude.
Well, why would I? I had to think about it, Ron. I had to take the LSAT to get in. I had to pay for the LSAT. I had to pay for my tuition. I had to work my ass off to get into law school. Here I am. I'm paying this professor to teach me constitutional law, and she whips out a privilege exam.
That is such bullshit. I mean,
right?
At least I had the. I don't want to say at least. I'm very grateful that and my wife Jane and I, we just look at each other all the time. See, our kids don't go to any of these schools. We have 4 adult children. They all attended religious schools. None of them is going to go to. Jane went to Hopkins and Stanford Law. I went to Princeton and Northwestern. None of my children are going to go to any 4-year college. I think one of my sons at least is going to get an MBA, probably remotely. They're extremely talented. Every one of these kids they could do anything. They're extraordinarily successful at their studies, and they're all Talmudic scholars. It's a different world, and we had if I had to send my kids in order to succeed in this world to go to school, even in your generation. I mean, my kids are older than you. I just don't know what I would do with myself. And plus, what you pay for this. Anyway, this is completely off topic. Because I had asked you about the crime in Utah. I want to throw something up on screen for a sec that I think you'll find very interesting. A tweet from my good friend Mark Rondazza. I think you'll appreciate. I liked that there was this zany state that was all Mormon and moral as shit, and wasn't full of drunks and pirates like myself. I'm bummed that Utah is monoculturing into a degenerate shithole.
Thank you.
I want Utah wagging its finger at us, just like I want Florida mooning Utah.
As do I, my friend. As do I. And that's the thing, Ron. We need some semblance of normalcy. We need some semblance of what is good to look forward to. When you're at the bottom, you're looking up and you're going, okay, how do I, if you know, for example, okay, as I gain more wealth, as I gain more opportunities, I know that people are still going to hate me because I'm white, or they're going to assume things about me because of my gender, or they're going to try and hold me back because of XYZ thing, regardless of what it is. If that's how you feel, you're not going to be empowered to step forward and to try. And that is what I was seeing happening here in Salt Lake County. There was this, you asked me what makes me qualified. Being DA does not mean that you are the key prosecutor. You're not going to be going in there like Fannie Willis, freaking hopped up on speed and showing up and arguing cases and putting the bad guys away. That's not what you do. What you do is you go to the legislature and you beg for money, and you make sure that that money is properly put where it should be, making sure that the office is running correctly, making sure that your prosecutors have everything that they need to be successful, making sure that the policies make sense and that they're in line with what the law requires, making sure that they are actually enforcing the law fairly. Making sure that they're up to snuff in terms of, are they litigating well? Do they have the training that they need? Are they working well with the police? Are the police doing their job? Do we need to investigate over there? There was a huge failure on the part of RDA in terms of the civil side. There was failures all across the board, but the guy is notoriously short-staffed all the time because he's an a-hole. He's difficult to work with. No one likes him. And if you're a stubborn attorney who's a little bit, blessed or have more of a charmed background, you kind of get a little entitled to be an a-hole. And there's this ego fest between attorneys that I never experienced because that wasn't my world. I wasn't raised that way. And I'm one of those people where, for better or for worse, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking. And that has served me very well in the business side of things, in the private world. It served me well in the government world when I've worked in both. And I thought, you know what? This is perfect for me. I couldn't think of a better role for me, especially when you have a DA whose policies that he was sending down to his prosecutors included one that said, you should not bring nor maintain charges against a defendant who you believe is innocent, regardless of the evidence presented. Ron, what legal standard is that? What, have you ever heard that? That sounds like a bunch of nonsense bull honky from a corrupt person who's trying to cover up their tracks to me.
In other words, believe is innocent is a subjective standard. That's what you're telling me, right? In other words, here I've got the file. Here's the file. Fingerprints, video, affidavits,
Yep.
officer's report,
Confessions.
blood work, confession. He doesn't feel guilty to me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really what it meant? I mean, let me play devil's advocate, because
Okay.
if there's one thing America has learned to be aware of in a way that it probably wasn't before the emergence of this phenomenally corrupt Biden administration and its enablers in the various states, is the extent of prosecutorial misbehavior, misconduct, ethical lapses for which they are never, ever held accountable.
Yep.
So I always asked my prosecutor friends, and one of the reasons I never went into criminal law, which I probably would have rocked at, I might have even been a successful lawyer if I'd gone into criminal law, because I belong in court. I belong on my feet, and doing civil work, I can go years without trying a case. I can have a year where I try 2 cases, but it's really unusual. If I would probably really be happy, but I didn't want that responsibility for people's lives, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
So I asked my prosecutor friends who I would meet in private practice, or in other words, ex-prosecutor friends, what would you do? What would you do if you thought the guy was, if you're handed a file and there's a police report, but you think the guy's innocent? And I'll get all kinds of different answers on that. But I what we've mostly learned, I mean, I'm talking to guys coming out of Morris County, New Jersey, okay? But these Southern District of New York scumbags, and these Washington, D.C. scumbags, and this Jack Smith, this is one thing I just could never get my arms around. I understand being incredibly ruthless in your career.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that I'm utterly incapable of it, but I understand that someone could really want, but to send people to prison for years or decades so you can have another notch on your barrel. I could never, and yet we see that people do it. And yet we see that people do it. So if you told me, well, there's a prosecutor in Salt Lake County, Utah, who said, you've got to look within your soul and say to yourself, I know that I've got the red weld here. I can put this guy away, but this doesn't smell right to me. I don't think there's a case. That might sound to me like a pretty enlightened point of view.
It could be if it were an objective standard. If all the evidence, though, is pointing to someone being guilty, here's the thing, Ron. Being a prosecutor you're not Superman, okay? Newsflash, prosecutors are not God. They're not Superman. They're not omnipotent. They're not omniscient. They can't read into a defendant's soul and say, I know that person is not guilty. What you do is you rely on the evidence that's given to you by your fact finders. And what I came to understand about this policy is that what it really was a deep mistrust and distrust of the police. They did not want to work with the fact finders, because if you trust your fact finders and you trust that you're getting evidence, then you follow the evidence. And if the evidence leads to a conviction, it leads to a conviction. If the evidence leads to an acquittal, it leads to an acquittal. If it means that you don't meet that probable cause standard, then you drop it. If it means you meet the probable cause standard, but there are mitigating circumstances that you become aware of and you decide, hey, you know what, let's try and work out a plea deal, or let's maybe, drop the charges later on, that's one thing. But to outright send over 200 denial letters, copy and paste for every single case, that to me speaks to what his real policies were, which fundamentally was deprosecution. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's this concept of leveling the playing field, creating equity in law by deciding just not to prosecute. And that's exactly what has happened here in Salt Lake County, and you're seeing the result of it. What's
Well,
happening is these low-level offenders, and I say low level because everybody says there's high-level offenders. That's bullshit. What that is it's coming from the perspective of someone who's never been poor. It's coming from the perspective of, oh, well, an assault on a homeless person, that happens all the time. We don't really need to throw the book at this homeless guy who beat up this other homeless guy to steal his stuff because
which
it's
is
not going to fix the underlying problem. We're not in the business of fixing problems, Ron, through our legal system. It is not well equipped to do that. We're there to enforce the law fairly. Now, if justice calls for something else and you can articulate why you're not prosecuting, then you need to make that argument to the people who you serve, because when you are DA, it's a very conflicting and very odd position to be in when you're an attorney, because you owe a duty to the Constitution, you owe a duty to the law, you owe a duty of candor to the court, and to somewhat a little bit higher than most attorneys, right? Because the court relies on you heavily. You are the state.
you have a higher standard, an ethical standard, but you are in fact less accountable for ethical lapses than people in private practice.
Very ironic. And then also you have a duty to the people, and you have a duty to somewhat to the defendant, right? You don't want to violate their rights. So you have all these very strong, powerful, conflicting sometimes duties, and you have to make decisions about how you're going to proceed. But if you don't start on a firm foundation of, I'm going to enforce the law the way that the legislature intended, and I will let the cards fall where they may, because I am not God, I am not the judge, I am the prosecutor. I am here to carry out the work of prosecution. That may not be pretty. It's not an easy job. You are absolutely doing the devil's work. It's not fun to be the state. It shouldn't be. What it should be is a necessary evil. That's it.
You really hit the nail on the hit the nail on the head there, Dani, because what we have seen come into its really horrific really highest zenithness is this cadre of people who believe that they are absolutely entitled to rule. Yep. And that everyone else is, I don't want to, I want to thank Torrent3 for the $5 super chat, the first transcontinental Lawstream super chat. And what she is saying here is she is listening.
He's phenomenal.
He is, Torrin. He's listening and braiding. You seem to know Torrin pretty well. What does it mean?
He made me a belt out of his braid.
Oh, he's braiding leather?
No, he's braiding. He's using this old Japanese style of creating these really incredible artistic belts, and he uses threads and he just plops them around. You have to see it. Go check out his channel, guys. Okay, it's so fun to watch.
Torrin, thank you. Listening and braiding, and he's liking this team up. I'd like this team up also, which was, and we met a couple of Fridays ago on Laid Back Law, and we just instantly knew that we had to see if we could do something. Torrin, he had a horrible life experience when he was young, and how he reacted to it made him a much better person. So, I mean, that's the amazing thing, is that you start out not wanting, look, like I said, I've had this essentially smooth life. I mean, listen, I've had moments where I've had my moments, okay, but in terms of the kind of high, scary stuff that you guys are really talking about, it is really true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
It absolutely does. And
but
so
if you handle it the right way.
Right. And that's where personal choice and accountability comes into play, right? There are certain choices that a defendant makes in their life that is either going to land them in jail or give them the freedom and opportunities that they need to succeed. If you want to save America, don't do it in the prosecutor's office. You're not going to do it there. Where you do it is in the lawmaking office, not the enforcement side, the lawmaking side. And then here's what happens. And this is what I told constituents all the time because, they know me. They know that I'm very libertarian by nature. And they said, well, how could you enforce, marijuana laws, for example, against people if that's something you believe should be legal? And I said, well, you do it. And then the legislature realizes how stupid it is. And your job as DA is to communicate that to the legislature and change the law. But if you don't have the numbers, if you're not showing them the actual case studies, then they have nothing to work on because these are all a bunch of privilege. Generally speaking, forgive me, state legislature, but generally speaking, they are privileged. They do have charmed lives. They have normalcy in their backgrounds. 98% of them do. And so unless you can take it to them and say, listen, this isn't working out because of XYZ thing, you are filling up the jail with a bunch of people who are smoking weed down on the corner rather than filling it up with the kitty diddlers. So which would you prefer to see in jail, the kitty diddlers or the marijuana folks? I can do both, but you only have so much space. So either you give me more money to fill up the jail, you recognize that there are certain harms and evils that you need to prioritize, but I can't do that for you. That's not my job. That's your guys' job.
At Legal Vice now quoting Sim Gill, and thank you for the super chat. One of the outstanding members of the LawTube fraternity. Sim Gill, colon, I am not going to prosecute a cop that made a very bad shot on a citizen's lawn. Also, Sim Gill, my personal office needs a taxpayer-funded $20 million security upgrade. All right. So this is a guy who is enjoying the good life of being on the public dole. Mm-hmm. This really does, though, get us to one of my favorite topics, and you really hit it, Dani, which is that there's this phenomenon that has been accepted by the political elite in our country, which is that prosecutors have been given this veto power over law. They've taken this admittedly esoteric concept of prosecutorial discretion and turned it into a fiat where the idea of prosecutorial discretion is I'm a human. I'm going to be the human being. Like you said, you have responsibility to the defendant as well, and to ethics and to the people. And it's a tough call, but I have been appointed or elected to this position, and I'm going to take the responsibility of not proceeding with this prosecution. It's not the right thing to do. They took that and said, it's okay for a prosecutor to announce either while running for office or after election, here are the laws that have been passed by the legislature and signed by the chief executive, the governor, that I have decided are not going to be crimes anymore.
Yep.
That's so freaking insane. That is such a gigantic collapse of the rule of law. It's mind-boggling. Oh, but Ron, they ran on it and they were elected. That's not how the balance of powers works.
No. It creates a Stalinistic show me the man and I'll find you, or find me the man, I'll show you the crime or whatever. That's exactly what it is. Because think about it. And this is what I was telling someone recently. I said, think about it this way. You are elected to office. Okay. Let's say that there's this MS-13 boss out there and he's money laundering through, let's say, a trucking company. Okay. And a trucking company gives you a very large donation for your campaign. And they make it very well known to you that that's their business, and that they hope that you'll be a great DA and ensure that there's no disruption of their business. Now, as your DA, you come to find out that there's some involvement between this trucking company and MS-13. So you go and put away one of the MS-13 gang members, right? One of the ones who are not quite top tier, but middle of the road, middle management MS-13 guy. He's, trafficking women, trafficking drugs, etc. You catch that guy, you're prosecuting him, and then suddenly you get a phone call from one of your constituents, and they say, DA, I thought you said you were going to be fair and equitable in your prosecution. All right? Either you let my guy go, or we're going to make this a racial issue, you name it. We're going to call up the ACLU, and we're going to come protest outside your building until you concede. And so what do you do as DA? Right? Now, the right thing to do is to say, oh, why are you so interested in this? To call up your police friends and have them immediately go in and start investigating, the boss guy. But if you're a corrupt DA and you understand that you want to stay in office, you don't do that. You let your MS-13 guy go, or you get a mark on your head, and you'd much rather just let it go and get a little payout on the side for your next election cycle. And this is what propels a lot of corrupt DAs to continue in their cycles. Now, it's not something that's easy to track or find or anything, but because of the lack of oversight and the immense discretion that DAs have, Ron, who's going to hold them accountable? Who's going to say no to that kind of arrangement?
Well, if the issue was raised, they'll investigate themselves.
Sure. Or the DOJ will come and see some discrepancies in finances and call it a day. And well, there's discrepancies, but we don't find any intent here. And we don't see any sort of criminal intent here. It's clear that this was just a simple budgeting error. And then they let it go. And then more and more good people who didn't do crap, right? Some guy, who knows, maybe his parents died and he lost his wife and someone shot his dog. He decides, F it, I'm just going to run right through this bank because they said I needed my ID and my ID got stolen, and they just hit the side of the bank. Next thing you know, they're in jail for the next 10 years. And it's like they're getting the book thrown at them, and the whole community is going, what the hell is happening to our community? And they don't understand why. Well, you need to prosecute someone so that way you keep getting money, right? So my whole issue with the DA's office is that there are very few checks on it. There's zero transparency, zero. They'll find any and every reason to bat away grandma requests, which is our FOIA request, right, for the state. They'll find any reason to prosecute anyone. And if you get in a DA who is so comfortable with that subjective amount of power that they put it in their policies and teach it to their DAs, to their prosecutors, what kind of society are you going to live in then? And so that's why I'm significantly overqualified for this position as compared to my opponent. Okay. That right there, that policy right there, you can take away all the statistics. You can take away everything else that this man has done in office or failed to do in office. That policy right there, if I could just change that, it would make a world of difference for Salt Lake County.
Of course, it's one thing to be able to enunciate, which you clearly can, what kind of things have to happen. And another thing to be able to actually effectuate those changes when you're in office. I spent a lot of time on the streaming with the Disney crowd.
Mm.
Oh, thank you, Torrin. He sent me some braid pics.
Aww.
On the Rocket Man platform. I think it's gonna be a long, long time.
Oh, you have a lovely voice, Ron.
Oh, thank you. So I interrupted myself though. Yes. Getting things done. Oh, so the Disney guys, and everyone's talking about Bob Iger. And I'm always trying to and I'm not really into, I don't go to the movies. I don't watch Disney. I'm not really, I'm an old man. I'm not, but, and also in our culture, we don't go to the movies. That's not something we do. So, but I'm always telling these guys, folks, this is not about Bob Iger. Yes, he's the guy who is squeezing the most money. I mean, that's what big corporations are mainly about, is enriching the top executives, and that's fine. If that's what the shareholders want, they just, they reinforce their commitment to that. But you could replace him tomorrow.
Mhm.
You seem to not appreciate that Disney as a company is absolutely saturated with the philosophy of DEI and wokeness, and that the company is existentially doomed. You cannot change it. In contrast, for example, to John Deere, and you see what Robbie Starbuck has achieved with John Deere in a very short time, just using his platform. It's amazing. I think a lot of the people who were working at John Deere were horrified, and there are going to be real changes there. But at Disney, it's the culture. You have the movie studio culture on the West Coast, and in Disney World, you have all these performers, all these people who come out of the world of entertainment. You have all these people who have what we now call progressive views and very entitled concepts in terms of what having certain kinds of sexual interests entitle you to as a person.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter who your management is, you can't overcome that. So in a prosecutor's office, okay, Dani wins, Dewey beats Truman. It's what? Wow, Gil Sims is out of there. You come in, and now you have all the people who are worked for him. Okay, you can put in some of your new top people, but the forces that you just described are still in place.
Mhm.
In other words, the hard choices, the risks.
Yep.
And then you have to make the machinery work the way you want it to. One of the things Donald Trump found out was that unlike when you buy a business, or really in his case, what was his business background before? Building things. He built casinos. He didn't buy ready-made, but he wasn't a mergers and acquisitions guy. He built stuff from the ground up. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but it was on his terms, and it was his people. He gets to Washington. He doesn't know how to work the machine.
Yep.
So one of the things that you will inevitably have on your list in the future of of a setback from which you learned and which benefited you in the long term was not winning that election. Because if you decide to run again and you win, you will be better off for having lost then, because you'll be older and wiser and that much more focused on, and it is an extremely challenging thing. I mean, I wish you all the best of luck with it. Maybe you'll reconsider. I mean, it's just something you're still committed to if it's possible.
I don't think I'll run for DA again. It looks like he's about ready to lose his seat because he's been a little less than impartial online. I don't know if you saw his most recent tweet where he said that a corpse would be better than Donald Trump as president, and heavily implied that he was very disappointed in the outcome of that day. And so he's getting a lot of pushback, rightfully so, because as DA, you want to be sure that you at least give the appearance, right, of fairness and impartiality, if not actually impartial. I tend to be more so impartial. I'm a little, and I say that from the perspective of someone who's come from where I've come from, right? When I say impartial, I mean I've seen both sides. I've seen the perpetrator. I understand I understand the hardships of life. I get it, right? I get what it's like not to have anyone to give you a hand up, to teach you better, to have other opportunities. I know what it's like to live with mental illness in your family. And fortunately, I'm not cursed in that way. I don't have to battle that. It is difficult. It's a challenge. But regardless, You were saying it's not like I'm going to be DA and change things overnight. You're absolutely right. And the bigger ship you get, the harder it is to write. And that's why I always laugh that people care at all about presidential elections. I'm like, you think the president's going to do anything? Ha! Go and talk to Congress. But then to a large extent, the president does have a lot of power, right? Because they send the policies down to the agencies, and the agencies are clearly the behemoths. But even then, it takes a while for that ship to right itself. And sometimes it doesn't. When you have ingrained bureaucrats like you do in federal agencies or in the DA's office, where you just have a stick in the mud and you can't get rid of them and no one wants to work with them. And they've made the culture so toxic that you can't even train new DAs or new employees or et cetera. I get that. It's not an overnight fix, but the hope that there's something better, the belief that, hey, we can change a few things. We're not going to make it perfect. I'm not coming in claiming I'm going to be a perfect TA. Lord knows I'm not even a perfect attorney. But if I can make a few changes to make everyone's life a little bit better, why wouldn't you?
And this is an important point also, because people always ask me, because I do get involved in cases that are sometimes high profile, although many of the most important cases are the ones that are not as high profile, because I remember once I walked into court in a case that actually did get a bit of publicity. It was one of the early domain name dispute cases. And there was a lot of crap going on between the parties, petty discovery junk. And the judge called us into court back when you went into court in person. And the judge said, I've got other cases besides this one. And what I didn't say to him, because he was such a tyrant, but what I wanted to say to him was, my client doesn't.
That's exactly right.
And every case that we take, every opportunity that we have to help someone it is a form of imitatio Deus, really. Everyone can have it in his life. Sometimes it is harder to see how you are doing the work of God in more mundane kind of enterprises. Often it's just enough to put up with the boredom and mundaneness of, shoving the pole in the hole, making widgets, whatever it is, so that your family can have a roof over its head and food on the table. But people such as yourself and I, who have the opportunity to actually help people solve what are sometimes very important problems in a kind of a leveraged way, because lawyers, we get to play with the real levers. You can go a very long time knocking your head against the wall, but what if once a year you win a case that no one else wanted to take that case? No, it really is an incredible opportunity. And I don't know just how unique it is to America, but certainly, it's nice to be able to look back on a career. I've been practicing for 35 years and say, I know for a fact that there are clients out there who say that I made a difference in their lives. And if you get the chance, as I do, especially after I got involved with joining Harmeet Dillon's law firm, to be able to be involved in, really high level cases, and you're really fighting the good fight. Yeah, no, you're not going to fix. I mean, boy, Harmeet and I've had this discussion so many times, and we've discussed it with all the people at the firm. We can't, and Donald Trump knows this as well. And she's very close to Trump. I'm not. I've never spoken to him, but we can't fix it, and he can't fix it. But we are obligated. There's an expression in the Talmud, a saying, a rabbinical teaching, that our responsibility is not to complete the work. It is merely to apply ourselves to it. Mm. God decides what actually gets done and what is accomplished. And if you are given the opportunity, and you mentioned JD Vance, what an extraordinary life at the age of 39, when I was probably only on my 6th or 7th law firm at that age. to all that he had, all the incredible things that he's been through, and now to be looking at a real shot at being vice president of the United States and set up to be the leading candidate for president of the United States. It's an amazing thing, and I think he realizes it.
He does. He absolutely does. And
you've softened on him considerably since our first discussion.
Oh, I fell in love with the guy. I fell in love with him and his wife. I am in love. I'm not I told you this before the show. I'm not a personality gal. I'm a policy gal, right? Don't tell me what you're going to do.
They say Dani the policy gal.
I'm Dani the policy gal. And that's you asked what I was doing when I was running. I was actually a policy advisor to a county council member. And so I had seen the way in which the DA was actually utilizing his funds in the budget. And that was a huge red flag for me. So yeah, so I'm a policy gal. But with JD Vance, he's walked the walk. He's not just doing the talk. He's walked the walk. And it gives me so much faith and trust that this man actually wants what's best for America and sees the real problems in this country. I turned to my husband. He looked at me and he goes, because we were watching the Hillbilly Elegy together. And before I came on the show, it's probably a little too much information, but I kind of got a little teary-eyed before I came on the show thinking, wow, I feel like I'm watching my memories on screen. I felt so vulnerable in that moment. I went, oh my gosh. And my husband turns to me, he goes, are you seeing this? And I go, yeah. And he goes, this was you. This is you. And I go, I know, this is insane. So I'm watching this unfold. And he's like, I get it now. And I said, what do you get? And he goes, why you love this country. And I said, well, why? And he goes, you and JD Vance really would be successful here because you both take it upon yourselves to be the good guy, to be the change you want to see, to fight for that good fight, regardless of the outcome, and to not give up and to not give up on people. That is something that is just, I have so much faith in this man. When you're poor, when you've gone through hell, you learn what real America can be like. But you realize that there's good and that good doesn't come from the government. The government's not going to come rescue you. The government's not going to pay your bills. The government's not going to come and fix your family drama. The government's not going to come and coddle you when everything is wrong. But you can be that change for someone else. And you can empower those people so long as they have the chance. And I see what JD Vance is going for now. And I see it in his speeches. This man gets it. He is the guy who's saying, hold your damn horses. Let's preserve what makes America good here. And what it makes it good is that it doesn't care where you're from. It doesn't care who you are. It cares what you do. And it gives you the space to do it. It gives you the chance to do it. I'm not taxed to death. Now, when I was poor, I was taxed to death, right? In my own conception. And it was true, right? I couldn't even afford a cell phone bill. And yet half of my taxes were going, or half of my paycheck was going to Social Security and Medicaid. Boy, just wait till I became an attorney, So, and then state taxes, you're no longer exempt. But you realize that the cultural shift that needs to happen in this country needs to come from within. It can't come from the government. And when you have the government pushing cultural norms on the people from a very global perspective, right?
Yeah.
This is how we should be. We should all have one language, one people. Imagine there's no heaven. Oh my God, I hate that song. Okay. There is no song I hate more than that stupid song because it's the anthem of people who've never struggled and have never had people in their lives who care about them. It's the anthem of people who see other people as widgets, as nothing more than a number to put into a system. And what I like about JD Vance is he understands the struggle of what it is to be human. And he loves you anyway and wants to give you that chance to live a life. And that is something that is so pure.
So much so that he followed Ron Coleman on Twitter.
He followed you on Twitter and not me. I'm so mad.
That was crazy. That
so
was
what do you like about JD Vance now that I've gushed?
I was not. I actually had been following him, as I joked in that in that video that we made. I had been following him for a while. He seemed like a really, really solid conservative senator, and I understood that he had gone through ideological changes. A lot of people have done so as well. This might be a corollary, actually, of that expression, of that saying that supposedly Winston Churchill said that if anyone who is not a liberal as a young man has no heart, and anyone who is not a conservative as a fully grown adult has no brain. It's not a crazy thing to have. I remember when it looked to me that Trump was going to get the nomination. And I've lived in the New York area my whole life, okay? So I know who the hell Donald Trump is. He did not strike me as presidential timber.
He still doesn't. Come on.
And he and also I'm a little bit prejudiced. And this is why this is probably why I was a Ted Cruz guy. I like people who can articulate well-developed thoughts very clearly. And Donald Trump is not really, he's loquacious. He has what to say, but his command of the precisions of language is not ideal. And having said that, through 2016, I saw what was going on. I saw who hated him, who was against him. I realized, no, he's not really a conservative. What he's actually doing is trying to reassert what regular people believe. Regular Americans. Hey, we have a border. Maybe we should use it to prevent people from coming into our country, except under conditions that we set. That's not a conservative point of view. That's like saying doctors for penicillin. I mean, that's something that you do. So it's that sort of thing. JD Vance made that journey, as many of us did. Some didn't make that journey, and frankly, they have no excuse. I think as a general rule, the people who never left the Never Trump camp are snobs. Mm-hmm. Trump is, I remember I used to read Spy magazine in the 80s, and they used to call him short-fingered vulgarian. Vulgarian, V-U-L-G-A-R-I-S-M. A word they think that they made up.
It sounds made up. I've never heard of it. Oh, like a vulgar person, a vulgarian. Okay, right, I got it.
Yeah.
Click.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And as is Brett Cohen, who gifted 5 lawyer Ron Coleman memberships. Brett, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
God bless you. You're a great American. So Vance made that journey. Look, I'm a little bit prejudiced also. Anyone who gets into Yale Law School, I know, is an intellectual heavy lifter. It's not like going to Harvard, by the way. You can go to Harvard just by being one of those people who just always, who knows how to.
Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives. Oh, that was Stanford. Sorry.
Well, but just, I mean, but the point is, it's a careerist kind of move to go
Sure.
to Harvard. It's like if you know how to hit the mark every time and always show up and all of those kinds of things, I get it. I never was able to do that. I was having too much fun in college, learning and being a DJ and, acting and singing and dancing on stage and being in the choir and being in the jazz ensemble. I mean, I did everything and I virtually never saw the inside of the library. But you have to respect somebody who's a former Marine And from a background like that, so as a man, I could, but then also you start seeing the things that he's quoted as saying, and he's a plain speaking, like Donald Trump. He says what we're all thinking.
Yep.
And I'm not talking about the high level Yale Law Journal stuff. I'm talking about just the regular things, just the regular. I mean, one of the great things that I think that Trump is terrific at is shoving, at a news conference, shoving questions right back in the face of, snarky, entitled, posturing, commie reporters. He really, I mean, I would handle it a little bit differently, but I have to admit, I've said to myself sometimes, gosh, I wonder if I could do that.
Ron, if someone asked you, why do you call it the Chinese virus? What would you say? Because it's from China, okay?
It's from China.
It's from China.
Yes, D. Watt. He is bombastic, as you point out. So also, when I heard the list of perspective, in other words, to some extent, Donald Trump made it easy. Who is he considering? I understand why he wouldn't want to team up with an eGOP guy. Mm-hmm. Like, I think Marco Rubio's okay. He's not anyone's leading edge on anything, but he's a solid conservative. I do think he cost Cruz the nomination in 2016, but all right, that's the game. But I didn't see that as a good matchup, a winning matchup. Another relatively old, and he's not as old as Donald Trump, but he's like my age. He's not the future so much. I remember seeing some people on Twitter saying, Ben Carson. No, Ben Carson's a genius and a great humanitarian and a tremendous man, but no charisma. He did nothing in the primaries. He's not. Why? Because he's black? And isn't he? He's pretty darn old also. The Tulsi Gabbard concept struck me as a little bit flaky, Like, why?
What's the role of VP? I mean, that's one of the things I thought about today. Well, what would I want in a VP, right? I want someone who's loyal, someone who can mirror me to step in where I'm not, right?
Okay. Are you asking what's the role of the VP or what's the role of the person sharing your ticket? In other words, is that the political question or the job question?
So right now we're in the political ticket, right? So for your ticket, what are you looking for? What do you think a VP needs for Trump?
So the idea is to present, I retweeted a number of people actually tonight who were saying, it's largely much ado about nothing. People pretty much vote for the president, not the vice president. But there's a marginal message. I mean, people have been saying he replicates Trump's base. What was gained here? To which I respond, no. I think the Rust Belt was gained. I don't believe Trump was as strong as he could be there, especially in Union territory. He's much younger than Trump. I mean, it's really a generational sort of call, but the idea of really getting a vice president who's completely out there and doesn't match you, but it's to appeal to some group of voters that you're not going to appeal to. That always struck me as pretty crazy. Christina makes a good point that the VP used to be the runner-up in the Electoral College. And the problem, as Christina knows, is that resulted in people having vice presidents who were their political rivals.
Yep.
So, and for example, Andrew Johnson was not a very good successor to Abraham Lincoln. In any event, yes, we are, I think, all on the same page here. I think it was all around a solid choice. I like the idea that he reinforces the Trump message, that this is what the Republican Party is about now. Forget about the Bushes.
Yep.
I mean, when in my day, we used to say the Rockefeller Republicans. Okay, so that's 50 years ago. Forget about the Bushes. Reagan is decent. Thank John Anderson clarifying Andrew Johnson was picked by Lincoln, and I do appreciate that. It was a little bit different in the Civil War context. It is a strong reaffirmation that this is the message of the Republican Party, that we want to appeal to the working class. Yes, it is a populist message, but it is not hopefully a demagogic message. There's a difference between being a populist and being a demagogue, and I think the Democrats have made a commitment to demagoguery that is just mind-boggling. I mean, that's just adjectives. That's not really a productive way to. So you had been skeptical when we first discussed the topic a couple weeks ago. You've come around big time. You're now his JD Vance's fan. I was looking forward to JD Vance debating Kamala Harris.
Oh, everyone was. Come on. I wanted to see her smile and say, "Excuse me, I'm speaking." I mean, she's still going to do it anyway. She can't help herself. But I wanted to see JD Vance go, "Yeah, and I'm interrupting," and then continue on, right? So I really was looking forward to that. He was looking forward to that, right? That his first rally, he was like, "I'm just mad that I can't get the opportunity to now debate Kamala Harris." And wow, what a nut show. What a nut job. What is happening in the Democratic Party? What are they doing? They're just picking winners now so that, you don't get to choose your candidate. Could you imagine if the Republican Party had done the same? I explained this when we all watched the RNC together. Everybody said, well, why is everybody voting for Trump? Aren't these usually contested? And I say, yeah, when the primaries are contested, but Trump won out all of the primaries. So he's the presumptive nominee and no one's going to go against him, especially after what just happened to him. Right? So that's different. Everybody is behind Trump. Our party has selected Trump. I don't know how you as a Democrat could vote for Kamala Harris knowing how she was chosen. I mean, I'm fine with it. I think for the DNC, though, it makes sense because she's a dud and she'll never be a good presidential candidate, and they know it. And so this is an easy.
Well, wait a minute, Dani, didn't you read all the polls? And everyone's saying that look here. You can't deny this. I'm seeing, snippets of her talking to people. This is a live human being. She is an empty, soulless person. She is a dummy. She is facile. She is many things. Brainless, but she is a live specimen, which we have not had in the White House for a while. That's a gigantic improvement for them. So there's a certain amount of enthusiasm about that. But I mean, the water carrying by the corporate press has been so over the top.
But you know why they are, Ron? You know why they are? It's because Alex Soros just got engaged to what's her name? Huma Aberdeen. How do you say her last name? The one who was married to Anthony Weiner when he got caught being a little kitty diddler himself, allegedly. Right? So he is now engaged to her. She was the key policy advisor, right-hand woman to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is on board with Kamala. I think, who do you think Kamala is going to pick as her VP?
Isn't that a great question?
Because that's a lot of money coming from Alex Soros into this run. That's a lot of money coming from Alex Soros.
How does she pick someone who will not outshine her? Answer: the homeless shelter you lived in. That's where she'll have to go to find someone who is less, who's not going to suck all the air out of the room. This is a bit of a problem for her.
Mm.
I don't, I'm actually enjoying the process of trying to figure out who she's going to pick, because the Democrats' bench is awful. It's awful. It's just, you do just keep coming back to this idea that there's 25 to 35% of the country who will vote for the Democratic candidate regardless. I mean, when I was growing up, Ronald Reagan won every state besides Massachusetts and, was it New York? 48, someone remind me. Not because there weren't two parties, but because Mike Dukakis was anywhere nearly as bad as any of these Democratic. I mean, he was like a Hubert Humphrey. He was like just a regular Democratic politician guy. That can't happen anymore. That will never happen again, because people are absolutely theological about their party preferences. Let me just make one thing clear. I've been a Republican my entire adult life. I was a Reagan Bush activist in college, and it was not necessarily so fun being associated with the conservative movement, even in the 1980s. Not like it is today. You weren't, spat on, but people would pull down the posters that I put up. I was a Republican activist. I'm not a big politico. I mean, I spent years away from the whole thing. I voted for Bill Clinton in 1992 because I thought he was a better candidate than George Bush, who I thought was out of it. I didn't like James Baker. I thought that Clinton, and I was right.
You didn't like Bob Dole?
What's that?
You didn't like Bob Dole?
Oh, no. Bob Dole was 96, wasn't he?
That was 96. You're right. I was in love with Bob Dole as a kid. I thought he was the nicest guy.
Everybody likes Bob Dole.
He just
Bob
had
Dole.
This,
Bob Dole used to refer to himself in the third person.
I talk about myself. Oh my gosh, Bob Dole, you taught me.
He was a great American. But Bill Clinton was a centrist Democrat. And I remember thinking, wow, what an interesting concept. What if the Democratic Party comes back from the irrelevance that seemed to be courting, and then the first thing he did in office was the first attempt to end the restriction on homosexuals in military service. That was the first thing he did. And by which he was immediately announcing to us, I fooled you. I fooled you. You thought I was, at the end of the day, actually, he was a relatively moderate liberal. Did balance the budget.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I understand why he wouldn't trust Clinton.
He did pretty well in terms of international policy. Like, I'm not gonna fault him there. I think he was great that way. And you guys have to know, I am of the belief and opinion that you don't have to be a good person to be a great president.
Well, that is an important point, and you're 100% right. And thank you, Jay, for the 10 Ron Coleman memberships. I now have so many members that I don't know what to do with them. I never had problems, maintaining my members before. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's very generous. So I came to regret it. Those days are over. People don't switch around anymore. But obviously they do. It's the middle. The middle part switches around. Yes, you're making another important point, which is that you don't have to be a good person to be a good president. And people really get bogged down. And that's why, a lot of conservatives are, you don't have to be a good person in your personal life. You do have to be ethical in the conduct of your office. You know, it's amazing how to live in a time when you have someone like Bill Clinton, like Joe Biden, who became a, you know, worth high 8 figures of money, spending his entire life in government. That's never been considered to be worth an investigation by any major media outlet. It's okay. So that's where the world we live in is more like the world that preceded the golden age that ended than most of history. Yeah. People there used to be dozens of newspapers. You know, if you're from New York, Times Square, that's where the Times was published. Herald Square, that's where the Herald was published. There were there were like 7 morning newspapers and 4 tabloid, afternoon papers. And it was understood that papers had points of view. And these guys were in the tank for labor, and these guys were in the tank for management, and these guys were pro-war, and these guys were anti-war. That ended up not being a sustainable long-run economic model. And once we got into electronic broadcasting and radio, and the distribution of the radio spectrum and regulation that came in with that, really changed the game. And then we got this idea, the fairness doctrine, this idea that media broadcasting of information is a limited resource, a fallacy, but that was the regulatory basis. And therefore, we're going to sort of all pretend to be objective, and then we'll just cheat a little bit around the edges. Now we're going back because the internet is like the 1,000 flowers blooming. It's like all the hundreds of different newspapers that once existed. We can have this conversation on our little podcast, of which almost 1,600 people are listening to us, and maybe a few thousand will eventually watch the replay. Discussions like this make a difference because even though the corporate press is playing this stupid game, they're of less importance to everyone other than people stuck in airports and the lobby of my building, frankly. Otherwise, who pays attention to them? Practically no one.
Yeah, I mean, Steven Crowder was getting better ratings than CNN during the election, and then he got shut down by YouTube. So, but when I'm looking at JD Vance in terms of a good candidate for the ticket, here's what Donald Trump needs to do. Okay, here's where I'll critique. So I think JD Vance is perfect in almost every regard. He needs to become a little bit more precise in his speech, though, in his language. Otherwise, he's going to turn off a whole block of voters. And you know who that block is? The most important block for Donald Trump in 2020 that he lost out by a large margin, and that's women. Everybody says, oh, well, we don't vote as a group. That's true. That's true. However, I recognize that in terms of your everyday average woman, hardworking, who's had to put, food in the mouths of their children, who cares about their kids, and who's mildly successful in life, tend to vote more Republican, tend to vote more conservative because they care about their kids, they care about their well-being. But a much, much larger portion of the population these days are extremely highly educated, liberal females, women, and a lot of them are divorced recently or are on their second or third marriage or are single, either with or without kids, okay? And they are not the brand of women that we've had in the past, that what we would conceptualize as an American woman does not apply stereotypically to women today. And I have said this time and time again, Donald Trump's failure when it comes to women is that he is picking the ideal women, right? We are picking like the one in a gazillion women, people who graduated top of their class from Harvard, from Yale, from Stanford, gorgeous, what was it? Miss Florida. That was Kaylee McEnany. Summa cum laude, just brilliant, brilliant, incredibly smart, pretty, successful, 3-kid women on his campaign. I'm like, wait a second. That's not representative of the vast majority of women out there. The vast majority of women out there are working their ass off, can barely afford to take care of their kids, to pay the bills. A lot of them, the dads walk out. The dads, they've had enough. People resort to all sorts of selfishness. And they were raised in a world where they were told, don't get pregnant, don't have kids. I grew up in that world. I was always told kids are the death knell. Death, don't do it. They'll destroy your career. They'll destroy your ambition. They'll hold you back. And they do to a large extent, but they don't.
But what are you living for?
Then what are you living for, right? And so here's the thing. When it comes to men, and this is what I told my husband, because he was like, he didn't understand what I was trying to say until I said it this way. I said, look, when you look at Kamala Harris, you think, oh, does she have kids? Is she married? What's her husband like? When you look at Jeff Bezos, do you even know if Jeff has kids? Have you ever thought of it? Probably not till I just mentioned it. That's the difference in American culture that needs to shift, and the perspective that Trump needs to shift. He needs to start speaking, and not Trump, but JD Vance, since he's made it an issue now. He needs to start seeing women as independent, equal, in power individuals who have their own choices, and he needs to speak directly to them and make it matter to them.
So this goes back to what you and I
vote.
This goes back to what you and I discussed in our preview videos, which is JD Vance's wife, Usha, is another example of this goddess superwoman. Yale. Oh, well, we met at Yale Law School, and she clerked for Roberts and Kavanaugh.
Yep.
I mean, these are not normal people.
Yes. And her parents were immigrants, but they were successful, right? And they came in and they really made it. And so that's, the perspective change that needs to shift there. I think JD Vance can more than willingly do it. I think he could do it very, very well, but he needs to go take time, sit down with regular working class folks, especially single mothers. And he needs to bridge that gap. If he keeps labeling, saying things that are true, granted are true, leave that to Trump. Let Trump piss off the lady folks. JD Vance, don't go doing that right now. You have the chance. Okay. Trump has already burned his bridges. Remember the whole Women's March and all of that, and get your hands off my kitty cat and whatever else. Okay. That ship has sailed. JD Vance, though, has the opportunity, if he accepts it, to really reach out and to go meet with single mothers, to meet with career women who've abandoned any notion of getting married. They're not interested. They don't want kids. Those women exist and they're happy. Guess what? I know it's a concept that's really hard for people to grasp, because biologically, everything we know for thousands of years, it makes sense that women would be happiest if they're married and have kids. And that may be true, but that's not true for everyone. And until we accept that there are some lonely women out there who are happy as can be. They love their cats. They love to travel. They don't feel like they missed out in the same way that men are.
Often they love their nephews and nieces.
Yes,
I did a podcast with a lady who her entire she wrote a book, and her brand, what she sells is being an aunt, because some people don't get to have kids. Not because she doesn't want to, not because she's a lesbian, but because it hasn't worked out for her.
Yeah.
But she's found ways to be a giver to other children in her family.
Well, and mentees, right? In the same way that men go and live very successful lives, and they sometimes will choose proteges, right? They'll choose a mentee. They'll choose someone to take over for them. And in a lot of ways, women are doing that as well. That's what we're seeing with this more with more opportunities in terms of the workforce and career field. And I think the feminists, the radical feminists who came before me that opened those doors, I hate the cancerous feminists that exist today that are dead set on closing each and every one of those doors or opening them to men coming into my spaces. Get the hell out, okay? And this was so funny when I was in law school because everybody said, "Oh, I don't understand you. Why are you pro-life? Make it make sense. You know, you've told us your background, you told us where you're from. Why are you conservative?" And they I had a struggle session where these four other law students crowded me and sat me down in a room. And I'm smelling the kombucha from their breath as they're yelling at me. And I turned to them and I go, "Listen, just because, you guys don't like sexism, do you? Because you realize what you're doing right now is extremely sexist. You've stereotyped me and you've labeled me and you've put me in a box and you've said I must vote this way and I must do these things in order to be a woman without ever conceptualizing that there is a huge strata of women who disagree with you. We don't all work the same way. We may have shared experiences by virtue of, our biology, our upbringing, cultural norms and acceptability.
You still constitute half of humanity. There can only be so much commonality among half the people in the entire universe.
Right. And I think the biggest mistake that Republicans make, by and large, is that they classify women as being in this box. And the liberals do it too. Don't get me wrong. The liberals do it too. Why do you think when you were growing up, didn't you remember hearing pro-life people in the Democrat side? Because I do. I remember there were pro-life Democrats, strong pro-life Democrats, and they all got shot out by these radicals. And there were pro-abortion Republicans when I was growing up. And they said, "Look, here's the viability standard. We're okay with this. We would like states' choice, but otherwise Roe v. Wade is what we would implement here."
Yes. So that, to some extent, Roe v. Wade was the killer. Precisely because it was so unconditional. Precisely because it did not talk about, any limit. It implicitly was understood as a thing that constitutionally there was no limit. To the point where now people have made a fetish out of. When I say a fetish, I mean in the classical meaning of the word, meaning
yes, like a sexual fetish.
No, the classical meaning of the word is like a totem. In other words, something that is worshipped. It is because it is a sacrament, and that's why there could no longer be a pro-life Democrat or a pro-abortion, pro-choice Republican, because you're either on one side of the divide or the other. Same thing with, all Trump has this problem. He's not been consistent. I mean, what are your alternatives? The fact is, most of the choices in life are really one thing or the other. There are times when compromise makes sense. There are times when I remember being taught by a great philosophy professor about the concept of false dichotomies. But there are real dichotomies. And if you're not voting for Trump, you're voting for Biden or you're not voting. If the things that Biden stands for and the Democrats stand for are things that bother you, you should hold your nose and vote for Trump. I don't have to hold my nose. I mean, partially though, because we've held our noses with respect to those unpleasant things about his personality and his personal life, many of which have more to do with his distant past. He's an old man now. He's
not so distant. Not so distant. I mean,
well, who knows?
To be fair, but I get what you're saying. Saying. Time has come. Yeah.
In the last 5 minutes of our inaugural Transcontinental Lawstream, if anybody has anything that they want us to talk about, we'd love to hear from you. I'm not cadging for super chats. We are both scanning, and Jane was watching a little bit. She hates watching me but she thinks I'm looking at my phone, but I'm looking at the comments.
Can I just say one thing? Everybody, everything that we discuss on this channel, whether you agree with us or not, whatever your opinion may be, none of it freaking matters if you don't go vote. Actually show up and vote, right? If you disagree with us, great, go vote your conscience, but actually show up and do it. Bring your ID. Even if they don't ask for it, hand it to them anyway. Here's my ID. I am who I say I am.
Oh, that's interesting.
And take it. Normalize it from the other side. Normalize it from the other side so that it becomes so innate and so natural that it seems odd that we wouldn't ask.
That goes back to I'm going to try my best to make bookends here. What we were saying before, not at the very beginning, but I think in the first hour, it is a fallacy. And in fact, it is a fallacy that they want you to accept, that you don't make a difference.
Yep.
That nothing you can do can change their domination of your life, their control over your choices. They're occupying the entire field of your options. Not true. Not everybody gets to be a lawyer. Not everybody gets to be good looking like me. Different opportunities come to people different. In your life, you have choices because by the grace of God, you're an American. And if you're with it enough that you're not strung out on meth, you're not tied up in a box under a bridge, you're able to hear the sound of my voice. That already puts you so far above the average level of existence of virtually everyone who ever lived on this earth since the time of creation, that you are uniquely privileged and you have the ability to change things in small ways and large. And JD Vance is an example of someone who comes from all but tied up under a bridge, like Dani was describing at the beginning about her own humble, to put it mildly, I would call them traumatic, but she's not looking for that kind of pity or condescension. Making differences in lives. It's an incredible thing. You can do it. You've done it by joining us here, by the way, in our first live stream. And I explained, we're going to do this every couple of weeks until, like I said, just the irresistible power of fame and fortune force us to do it more often or something. But next time will be on August 8th. I think I looked at the calendar and figured that out. That sound right? Yes, it does. August 8th at Dani's place.
That's right.
Dani on Direct. And come get your friends. Everyone should replay this. Put it in the background while you're baking your cakes and steaming your strudel. Thanks for joining us.
Now you're making me hungry, Ron. Everybody go do the YouTube things. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't. Ron is amazing. Yeah. If you couldn't tell already.
I am.
And where are you going to get this great quality content? Let me tell you all something. When I was going through law school, when I was growing up, and I say that I had really great mentors and I had really great people who I could sit down with and have these discussions with in private. I cannot stress to you the importance that had and the impact that had in my life. And you guys are getting it here for free. It costs you nothing. All it costs is 2 seconds for you to hit that click button and to make a difference in your life and to be edified by our conversations and our discussions. So please make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can come back for more, because we know you.
Thank you. And thank you, Brett, for your 2 Aussie dollars. Good night, everybody. And have a pleasant tomorrow.